Welcome to the Broken Not Broke interview, the leading podcast for families impacted by childhood cancer. I know it's a very difficult time for you and your family. I've been there. And that's the reason I can tell you that the more information you get about organizations offering support to families like yours, as well as the cancer ecosystem in general, you'll be more prepared for this cancer journey with your child. Today, we're going to learn from the Ellie Ruby Foundation. The founders will explain the mission of the organization and the amazing programs they are doing to support families. We'll also have our money insight of the day. And as always, please feel free to visit brokenNotbroke.org if you need information about organizations nationwide, more than 400 of them, that will support families like yours. You can just go to the website, brokenNotbroke.org, and select the state, type of cancer, type of assistance, and you'll get a list and links directly to their websites and forms to fill. Let's start with the interview. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Broken Not Broke interview. I want to thank our guests today, Brittany and John, who are the founders of the Ellie Ruby Foundation, a fantastic organization helping families, specifically regarding brain tumors, but in general. So we'd love to talk to them about their experiences, the inspiration behind the foundation, and some of their observations. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you for having us.
So the first question is essentially, tell us the story behind the foundation, what inspired it.
The Ellie Ruby Foundation, named after our daughter, Ellie. Our foundation is inspired by her because she smiled through her entire journey and battle and is still smiling with us today through brain cancer. She had an aggressive brain tumor, glioblastoma, grade 4. And during that time, it was very rare, and we had not known any other families who had gone through an experience like ours. And we realized that we needed to help other families to help them finding support, finding emotional support, financial support, caring for our other children at home, meals, places to stay. The list goes on and on. When a cancer diagnosis hits a family, it hits every aspect, and we just felt that we needed to be there to support other families through that.
And I'd add that, we were just so lucky throughout our journey that we had the support of our community, our family, our friends, our colleagues, that this was creating the foundation was just our small way of just saying thank you and making sure that we are paying forward, that others would have the same level of support that we were so lucky to have throughout our experience.
Well, I'm glad to hear that, the support that you receive inspire the fact that you want to make that to happen with so many other families that might not have the same situation. What are the biggest lessons that you have learned so far, and how are they informing the priorities you have down the road?
The first lesson, we learned that it's a marathon, not a race, and to take each day, one day at a time, and work on that day, because the next day will be another challenging day in a different way. And with each challenge, there are opportunities for more support with the right people in place. And there are people and families and foundations that are there to help us. And we just have to do a better job at connecting with everyone.
I think connections are essential. And I think, from what I've seen in your website, you work with other partners to make those connections. So I'd love to hear about, how you're working on the different programs, on the research side, on the financial assistance side, the awards for the nurses. Love to hear more about that.
So let's start with the awards for the nurses. There were plenty of times that our Ellie was in the PICU. Having a brain tumor diagnosis often puts you in the PICU because it's so rare and unique and needs constant, Q1 checks. Us tired parents would close our eyes for, seconds, minutes at a time while the nurses were working around the clock, checking vitals, checking every machine, or just playing with Ellie. And while she was bedridden, and the nurses would always keep Ellie's smile on and also, keep our smiles on, offered to bring food, would give us a break when we wanted to take a phone call. And we realized that nurses are so under-recognized because the doctors come in and say their piece and then they leave, and the nurses are doing all the dirty work. And we felt that it was important to recognize one nurse each year to show that we do recognize the nurses in the hospitals. So that's how we piloted that program. And the very first year we awarded the nurse was at one of our functions. We did an outdoor carnival event during COVID, and we presented this award as a surprise at our event. And it not only made that nurse feel so special, but it also showed our entire community who attended the event and beyond how much nurses do for the children with pediatric cancers in the hospital and how much more needs to be done to recognize their support.
I would say that the formation and the mission was all from the lens of our own experience. What we saw was really what was really successful that we wanted to make sure we leaned harder into, and then the gaps that we had in our care that we wanted to make sure we could just make that experience a little bit more seamless for the next family that unfortunately faces something similar. So the mission of the Ellie Ruby Foundation is to bring smiles and support to families battling pediatric cancer. And the way that we bring those smiles and support can be through a myriad of different ways. It could be, I think back to Ellie's journey. Ellie she was less than 1 year old when she was diagnosed. We didn't have the ability to enter in any clinical trials. When she failed the first line of chemotherapy, our oncologist told us that we are on uncharted territory. So our focus and where majority of the monies that we are able to raise really go towards securing better cures for children and making sure that care is more accessible. And then, from there, some of the things that Brittany had mentioned, the financial and the emotional support, the statistics are unbelievably scary. Roughly a quarter of families face a 40% decline in income from a cancer diagnosis. So you're not only dealing with all of the, emotional stress from, that, you're working with trying to manage your entire family, trying to make sure your child is getting the best care, working with, your sick child. And, it's just absolutely devastating. But in addition to that, you also have to think about, how am I going to pay my rent? How am I going to pay for my car? How am I going to pay for my gas, my parking? It's expensive to go to the hospital every single day as well. So many families, unfortunately, have to, and some that we see are single family homes, where, the provider basically has to take a step back from work in order to make sure that they could be at the hospital caring for the child. And it's just such an unfair experience that you're trying to work through the emotional experience of having a child with cancer, that you're also trying to work through the, whatever financial consequences come with that. So we wanted to make sure that we could, help alleviate some of that burden in making sure that we can provide assistance, not just on the emotional side, but also on the financial side as well. One other thing Brittany had mentioned is, a cancer diagnosis is not just, the patient, but it's really the entire family. Ellie has 2 older brothers, and they were, very, very much part of that entire journey, and making sure that they had the right assistance in place to make sure that, they were able to navigate what they were going through in their own way. Having a sibling who's sick is very, very difficult. And they were young at the time, and, Brittany, to her credit, immediately made sure that they had the right tools in place. And I can look back with a big smile to say that, they are stronger and more resilient as a result of the support that they got throughout that harrowing experience.
Well, I must praise your approach to this work from a very comprehensive way. You're thinking of the different angles based on your own experience, the financial, the emotional, the incredible work that nurses, and I completely agree that that we need to recognize them so much more. So all those aspects coming together through your foundation, I understand why there is such an impactful work.
I think we forgot to include 2 important aspects that we try to focus on is going back to the emotional assistance. We took the lens from our family and our experience. Our boys were provided an exceptional therapist virtually throughout Ellie's diagnosis. And often the hospitals themselves offer therapies, but sometimes you need something more individualized. That therapist really supported our boys, especially when they couldn't see or be with us or with Ellie for countless days. And that was, truly helpful. And we try to do the same for other families by connecting them with social workers or therapists to make sure, because emotional support is just as important as all the other aspects, as financial support, and so on. And we also focus on providing for research. Ellie's tumor in particular is extremely rare. We were very lucky and fortunate that her tumor did not grow back after the proton radiation, but other families are not as lucky as we are, especially in the brain tumor world. And we, try to provide financial support for labs that are, continuing to study and research non-toxic formulas to treat these cancers and eventually cure them. A lot is still unknown, but a lot is still developing. Science is evolving each and every day. And kudos to our doctors, our researchers, our scientists for providing hope for us and families like ours.
And I think it's important that, when we started the foundation, you sort of come up with this vision of what it should look like. We've been really tried to be flexible with our approach, understanding that, every family is going to have their own experience, and making sure that you're flexible with how you work with that family, how you give them the support. Everyone is going to need a different level of support, both emotional and financial. But, just making sure that we're sort of flexible with how we can engage and be a little bit more custom and catered, because we saw how impactful it was for us.
So let me take that point, John, and ask you about the particulars of a region like the New York metro area, New York, New Jersey. And I'm thinking about the cost of living, and I'm thinking about costs like parking when you have to go for infusion or treatment or monitoring. Anything that you want to comment from the families that you have served that will address this point?
Yeah, so many of the families that we've helped have been in sort of the New York tri-state area, but there have been, I would say that we're, more national and also more global. There are some international folks that we've also helped as well. It's not cancer. Cancer affects the rich and the poor. I don't think that it's not discerning. And just because something that it's speaking with another foundation early on, like right as we were upstarting. And one of the things that they had said, which was very impactful, and it helped shape what we were doing as well, is whether you have, a mortgage that's $5,000 or whether you have a mortgage that's $500, your ability to pay that mortgage as a result of your child's illness, sort of doesn't matter, right? You're taking time out of work. So one of the things that we try doing is making sure that the financial assistance program, we really don't focus on the socioeconomic background because of that, understanding that the circumstances change. One family that we helped had a relatively high income, New York based, but now they had to start paying a nanny to watch their child while they were away. These are things that you don't necessarily think about, but the need is really there for. And I would say that it's not necessarily, New York tri-state area specific, but with rising costs, especially with high rents, we see a lot of families that are coming in to go to some of the New York hospitals. They're paying rent at home, and now they're paying for something that's also high cost here. And that's certainly a major financial headwind for some of these families as well.
I think specifically speaking for our family, we relocated to the Jersey Shore. We were originally living in Manhattan, actually, coincidentally, only 10 blocks from Memorial Sloan Kettering, where Ellie was treated. And we relocated to be with my parents in COVID, and then stayed with my parents for the support during Ellie's diagnosis. And we were constantly transporting back and forth from the Jersey Shore to Manhattan. And it was both physically tolling and financially tolling, like you had mentioned, Adrian, with parking, with the driving, with the tolls. And these are things to keep in mind for other families, that chemo treatments are, could be 3 days, 5 days, 7 days, and finding ways to transport both safely for children who are immunocompromised and physically is extremely expensive, and things to keep in mind when helping supporting families.
Well, I think it's very unique, the fact that you are serving and supporting families regardless of their income level. We see a lot of organizations that, for I think very valid reasons, also they want to focus on the families in the lower or moderate income level. But as you mentioned, this affects everyone, and regardless of where you are, because the reduction of income and the expenses increasing significantly, you will need support. So I think that is a very, very unique, but also very important approach that you have. Let's move beyond families and patients and talk a little more big picture here. Based on your observation with the foundation, also your own case, love to hear if you have any suggestions for policy changes or either regulations that will make a difference for families facing pediatric cancer.
I have a few that come to mind. I think the number that you'll often hear whenever you speak about pediatric cancer is 4, and that's that 4% of the National Institute of Health's budget goes towards pediatric cancer. Its cancer budget goes towards pediatrics. So it's incredibly underfunded, and if you look at some of the funding frameworks, a lot of that has been cut in the last year or two. So, you're not only seeing, not enough funding, but now whatever little funding we were essentially getting from public support, that's actually being, severely diminished from the level that it was. I read a statistic. It was about 75% of financial grants for pediatric cancer are actually driven by private foundations like the Ellie Ruby Foundation. So this just, sort of shows that the need for these private foundations and the need to support them so that they can really help support the causes that can really help change the lives of children and, in the future and change the framework for pediatric cancer is really an imperative. In terms of policy and regulation, I think so much of it also will come down to insurance and healthcare. I mean, I am in an incredibly fortunate position where my company was incredibly supportive throughout Ellie's diagnosis, continues to be supportive to this day, and ensured that we had the right tools in place from an insurance perspective to really have broad coverage for everything that we were facing with Ellie. So Brittany was mentioning, just as one point to bring up, she mentioned the traveling back and forth when you're at 50 miles plus away from a location. Very taxing. It could be completely financially destabilizing. We have an addendum insurance that essentially comes in that allows us to get some support on taxis that insurance will cover. The amount of time that you could spend on the phone with an insurance company, that can be, you could spend 24 hours a day, and it becomes incredibly hard to track when you go from 5 claims to 500 claims to 5,000 claims. I do think that there can be certain policies and regulations, particularly when you have a diagnosis for a young child, that can be more supportive to help families really make sure that, number one, the care that they're getting, they can actually get, that they don't face any of the headwinds that you typically can face with insurance, but also that there should be some form of extra addendum support in some of these policies, because it's generally not too expensive for employers to have available, because it will hit a smaller number of folks, but it's incredibly impactful for the families that need it.
Well, I couldn't agree more in many of the points that you make, starting for the percentages that are heartbreaking for parents like us. From there, from the policy, we can go now to the institutional level, and I'd love to hear, and you just mentioned your employer, any stories about the hospitals or the employers or organizations like yours. If you think about how they come together to support a family, any advice, any suggestions for them to improve this approach?
I think on an institutional level, the cancer diagnosis doesn't just stop when, you leave the hospital. You come home, and actually that's where the journey starts, the recovery, the therapy, and most likely for a pediatric cancer diagnosis, it's lifelong. There's physical therapy, there's occupational therapy, there's speech therapy, there's feeding therapy, and then it goes on into the schooling age in terms of supports at school and getting the right curriculums in place, programs, and all of that comes at a cost, financially and physically, and the institutions can help and should help these families navigate those processes. And it's often seen not at face level, and it needs to be dug underneath the surface. I think we have to build better teams with social workers at the hospitals, for the departure status of a patient.
And one of the things that was also eye-opening to me is, your experience is going to be the only thing that you sort of that you could sort of react to. But when you start a foundation and you start meeting with other hospitals and you see how other things function, how other social workers work, you can see a disparity between responsiveness of some social workers, the depth of what they actually know about the family and how they care for the family. It becomes very, very clear from the dialogue that we have when we're talking to different social workers about financial support. So if I'm thinking about a hospital of where they can invest time and money, where they'll get the investment back, one of those areas would be ensuring that the social workers really have the proper training, that they can really bring all of the supports to the family, because good social workers can also create that interconnectedness that Brittany was referring to, and making sure that, there are other foundations that can also support you if the hospital can do this, and here's who I want to put you in touch with. That network is so important and can be so impactful.
I think the best advice we were given when Ellie was in the hospital was don't leave the hospital until you have everything in place at home. There's no rush to leave. Nobody's forcing you out. And we took that to heart.
And, to the point about the hospital's training and just, the ecosystems of social workers and other pediatric cancer, world, Broken Not Broke was born because of that, conversations with social workers like the ones that you had. We're very, very fortunate to have an incredibly committed social worker. And the more that we talk to others, we realize that they need a lot of support in many ways. And we said, well, maybe a directory like the one that Broken Not Broke developed for this financial assistance for pediatric cancer can help. And they said, yeah, sometimes we spend like 70% of our time as detectives trying to find this information, because as opposed to the Ellie Ruby Foundation that has a very clear website, with very clear mission, many organizations we have found, they might be smaller, they may only have a Facebook group and a website, there's no updates. So I completely agree that we need to invest more in that particular skill of finding information, and connecting with organizations will serve so many families. Thank you so much. And is there any other message or comment you would like to say before we end?
I just want to thank you for bringing us on here, because words are powerful, and the more and more we speak about this, the more and more we can help other families and get together with other, foundations to support families. We can't do it alone, and it takes a village, but together we can make a difference.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. And to everyone, please visit the website. It will be here in the caption, the Ellie Ruby Foundation. And if you are looking for support and assistance, contact them. And if you can donate, please do. They are doing an amazing job and amazing work to serve families. Thank you so much to John, Brittany. For the money insight of the day, let's try to be conservative, regardless where you are in the cancer journey. In many cases, after treatment ends, families, feel, really happy about it, and spending increases, and maybe there's a incentive to make an investment. Unfortunately, childhood cancer is a long journey. Even in the best scenario, there will be a lot of expenses down the road. And then there could be even a relapse or recurrence. So you don't want to take too much risk, at least for the first few years. I hope you enjoyed the conversation with the Ellie Ruby Foundation. I hope you learned something new today. And please share this video, comment, make sure that other families, other patients have access to it. I want to thank our producer, Vanessa Toro, and to all of you for being here with us at the Broken Not Broke interview. See you next time.